It was a cold morning when I first realized how deep the chains had gone. My name is Eleanor Blackwood, and at 60 years old, I should have been enjoying my golden years. But instead, I was living in a mansion that no longer felt like home. The house that once echoed with laughter and love now felt hollow and empty shell, a reminder of all the years I'd spent building a life for my son Mark and for my late husband Robert. But Robert was gone now, taken too soon by cancer, and the house that we had dreamed of together had become my prison. And Mark, well, he was the key holder. The one who had the power to lock me in or let me out, though I was starting to see that he never planned on letting me out. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows on the polished floors. I could already hear Mark in the kitchen moving around with that sharp robotic rhythm he always had. It was almost like he was a machine going through the motions of life without ever really seeing what was happening around him. The scent of coffee was in the air, strong and bitter the way he liked it, and the faint sound of his phone buzzing as he scrolled through emails. My son, my flesh and blood, was just another man, now obsessed with his image, his meetings, his successes. The man who once adored me as a child, the boy who would crawl into my lap and beg for stories, was gone. In his place was a man who didn't even look at me when I walked into the room. No, it was worse than that. He barely acknowledged my existence at all. I walked into the kitchen, carefully setting down the tray with his breakfast: 2 scrambled eggs, crispy bacon toast, and black coffee. As I set the plate in front of him, I caught a glimpse of his face. There it was, the coldness. His eyes didn't meet mine. He didn't even smile. The faintest twitch of his lips when he grabbed the toast was all the acknowledgement I got. He wasn't even pretending anymore. He was above pretending. "Mom, this bacon is overcooked," Mark muttered without even looking at me, as if the world revolved around his preferences and nothing else mattered. "And the eggs too, Runny. Get it right next time." I nodded, of course. That was all I could do. "I'm sorry, Mark." "I'll do better next time," I said, my voice shaking with the weight of his criticism. His eyes flicked up to meet mine for a split second, just long enough to send a chill down my spine. "Yeah, you'd better," he replied flatly before turning his attention back to his phone. I felt the sting of his words long after he had spoken them. It wasn't just the bacon. It wasn't even the eggs. It was the way he treated me like a servant, like I was nothing more than a cog in his perfectly constructed life. I turned away, my hands trembling slightly as I wiped the counter. The air felt thick, like I was suffocating, but I couldn't leave. I couldn't escape. Where could I go? This house, the house I had bought with the money I earned, was now a monument to my failure, my unwillingness to stand up for myself. Mark had taken everything, and I had let him. He wasn't just taking my money anymore, he was taking my life piece by piece. As I poured myself a cup of coffee, the doorbell rang, breaking the silence. Mark didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge it. I knew who it was before I even answered Sophia, his fiancée, the woman he had brought into our home, the woman who had all the trappings of the perfect life, beautiful, successful, and completely oblivious to the monster her fiancé had become. Sophia, with her flawless smile, would be the next to pretend everything was fine, to act like the dysfunctional family we had become was just part of the charm. She walked in with a confident air, dressed in a light green dress, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor as though she were stepping into a perfectly curated world. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwood," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness, but it was as fake as the smile on her face. I could see it in her eyes, the pity, the judgment. She was the outsider who didn't know what was going on in the shadows, who didn't know the truth of the things Mark had said to me, the things he had done. I wanted to tell her to scream it all out so that she could see the truth, but I smiled instead. I had to. "Good morning, Sophia," I replied, my voice hollow. "How are you this morning?" "Oh, I'm wonderful, thank you." "I hope you're doing well, Mrs." "Blackwood," she said, taking a seat next to Mark without a second glance at me. It was a routine they had perfected, one of complete avoidance, where I was just a background character in their happy little show. I watched them sitting side by side as Mark took a sip of his coffee, his lips barely curling into a smile as he glanced at her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell Sophia about the bruises on my arms, the scars Mark had left on my heart, but I couldn't. I just stood there, a silent observer in my own life, because to him I was just a background prop, an old useless woman who had no place in his new world. Sophia's voice brought me out of my thoughts. "I see you've been busy this morning, Mrs. Blackwood," she said. Her eyes fell on my lip, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Concern, maybe, or fear, but it disappeared just as quickly as it came. "You should really cover that bruise better, you know." I nodded, smiling through the pain. "I'm fine, thank you," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. The makeup Mark had given me, the expensive foundation, was nothing more than a mask, one that could never hide the deeper wounds. It was a poor attempt to erase the truth, but the truth was getting harder and harder to ignore. There it was, right in front of me, in every bruise and every word Mark spoke to me with that cold, clinical detachment. It was in the way he controlled me, the way he manipulated me. And it was in the house I once called home, now a prison. As I turned away to clean up the mess in the kitchen, I knew deep down that something had to change. I couldn't live like this forever. I didn't know how I would do it, but the thought of Mark's cruelty, his coldness, was eating away at me. He had made it clear that he had no love for me anymore, only contempt. I had given him everything, and now he was taking it all. But as I stood there in the silence of that cold kitchen, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the lingering taste of the coffee that burned my throat, or maybe it was the realization that I was done being invisible. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that I could still be someone, that I was worth more than the hollow existence Mark had created for me. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and I would fight for it, for myself. The days blurred into one another, each one indistinguishable from the last, a cycle of obedience and tension I couldn't escape. Mark had always been controlling, but recently his grip tightened around me in ways that left me gasping for air. It wasn't just the verbal jabs or the constant criticisms about how I ran the household, how I cooked his meals, how I dressed. No, it was the little things, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, the coldness in his eyes when he demanded something, the way his presence seemed to fill every room, leaving me with no space, no air, nothing to call my own. And that's what he wanted. He wanted to strip me down to nothing. He wanted to make sure I knew my place, and that place was beneath him. It started with small, almost imperceptible changes. I would wake up in the mornings to find my bank accounts changed. Mark had taken control of my finances without asking. He told me it was for my own good, that I didn't understand the complexities of managing money at my age. How ridiculous it sounded when I said it out loud. He was stealing from me slowly but surely, and I hadn't even realized how deeply he had already dug his claws into my life. The $500 a month pension that should have been mine was being siphoned off into accounts I didn't recognize. The $100 I was allowed to spend for personal use became a cruel joke. I watched helplessly as the numbers dwindled in my accounts, each transaction a reminder that I was no longer in control of anything, not even my own money. One day, I decided to check the mail, hoping for something, anything that might give me a sliver of hope. There was a letter from the retirement agency. I opened it, my hands trembling. The letter said that according to their records, Mark had been added as the primary beneficiary of my pension funds. I stared at it, the reality sinking in like a cold stone in my chest. It wasn't just my money anymore. It was his. I didn't even know when he had done it, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that I had given him everything. Everything. When I tried to confront him about it, his reaction was typical. He brushed it off with a laugh, an empty laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry, Mom," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm doing this for you. You don't need to worry about money at your age. I'm handling it." He even had the audacity to give me a pat on the head like I was a dog, a pet that needed to be trained. I had always known that Mark could be selfish, but now I was realizing that he was capable of something far worse. He was a manipulator, a master of gaslighting, able to twist everything to suit his needs while making me feel like the crazy one. Sophia, his fiancée, played her part in this twisted dance as well. At first, she seemed like a breath of fresh air, a nice distraction from the tension in the house. But as the weeks passed, I began to see the cracks in her smile. She was nothing more than a puppet dancing on Mark's strings, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for her. She was in love with a man who had no love for anyone but himself. I remember one afternoon when she came over dressed in a tight-fitting dress, her heels clicking against the floor, like an expensive clock ticking down to her inevitable fate. She smiled at me, her eyes bright and false, but I could see it. She was afraid too. "How are you, Mrs. Blackwood?" she asked, her voice sickeningly sweet. "You look tired. Are you feeling okay?" It was a question I had heard so many times, but I never answered truthfully. I couldn't. Not with Mark standing in the room watching, waiting for me to slip up. "I'm fine, thank you," I said. Forcing a smile that didn't feel right, Sophia's eyes lingered on me for a moment as if she were about to ask something deeper. But then she saw the look Mark was giving her, the warning, the control, and she quickly turned away, pretending to fuss with her purse. I saw the brief flicker of guilt in her eyes, but it disappeared just as quickly as it had come. She wasn't going to save me. None of them were. Mark was too good at playing the victim, making everyone believe that it was I who was the problem, the one with the mental issues, the one who was getting too old to function properly. I had lost everything, my dignity, my money, my freedom. But most of all, I had lost myself. It wasn't just the money or the physical control that Mark had over me. It was the emotional manipulation that had sunk its claws into me deep down, where I couldn't escape. He made me feel small. He made me feel worthless. It was in the way he'd criticize me for every little thing, the way he'd mock me when I didn't do something to his liking, the way he would talk down to me as if I were a child, as if I didn't have 40 years of experience as a successful career woman. He would remind me constantly of how he was the one providing for me now. "You don't have a job anymore, Mom," he'd say with a smirk. "You don't have any money. I'm the one who's taking care of you. I'm the one who has everything under control." Every time he said that, it felt like a slap across my face, but I didn't dare show him how much it hurt. If I did, he would only turn it around on me. "See, you can't even take a little criticism without getting upset. That's why I'm in charge now. You're not fit to handle your own life anymore." But it wasn't just the verbal abuse that was wearing me down, it was the physical threat. The way he would corner me in the kitchen when I was cleaning up after dinner. The way he'd grab my arm if I didn't move fast enough, his grip tightening until I could feel the bones in my wrist cracking under the pressure. It was subtle at first, little shoves when he didn't like the way I did something, but it was escalating. And I knew deep down that it was only a matter of time before it turned violent again. The tipping point came one evening when Mark came home from work, tired and irritable. I had prepared a light dinner vegetable soup, a favorite of his, with freshly toasted bread. It was nothing extravagant, but it was made with love. When I set the bowl in front of him, he took one look at it and spat the soup back into the bowl. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, his face twisting with disgust. "It's bland. There's no flavor. It's like eating water." I apologized immediately, feeling my stomach churn with shame. "I'm sorry, Mark. I forgot the salt. Let me add some." But before I could reach for the salt shaker, he stood up from the table, grabbed the bowl, and threw it at me. The hot liquid splashed across my face, burning my cheek. I froze, stunned, as the porcelain bowl shattered on the floor. "You're useless," he spat, grabbing my arm and pushing me hard against the wall. The impact sent a sharp pain through my head, and for a moment everything went black. I could hear him yelling at me, telling me how pathetic I was, how I couldn't do anything right. But all I could focus on was the pain, the physical pain in my body, and the pain of realizing that the person I had loved and cared for my whole life, the person I had given everything to, no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me as a tool he could use and discard at will. As he stormed off to his room, I sank to the floor, my body trembling with rage and fear. This was my life now. This was what Mark had turned me into, a shadow of the woman I used to be, and it was only getting worse. The truth is, I always knew it was coming. I had seen the signs, those flickers of malice in Mark's eyes, the biting tone in his voice, the tight grip he kept on my life. I had felt it in every passing second, as though my very soul was being chipped away piece by piece. And yet I had convinced myself that things would somehow improve. Maybe it was my innate desire to protect him, to believe that the child I had raised, the boy I had nurtured with love and devotion, could never truly become the monster he was starting to show himself to be. I kept making excuses for him, telling myself that he was just stressed from work, or that his actions were merely the result of his own insecurities. I was trapped in a cycle of denial, just as much a prisoner of my own thoughts as I was of the house Mark had turned into a fortress of fear. But that night, everything changed. The moment the scales finally tipped, I knew I couldn't go on like this. I could no longer justify his cruelty, his manipulation, or his control. I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually drained. The bruises on my body had become familiar, like old friends I didn't want to acknowledge, but who still haunted me every time I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The house, once a place of warmth, had become my cage. My son was no longer the boy I had raised. He was a stranger, a man who saw nothing wrong with abusing me, using me, stripping me of everything that had once made me whole. It started with an ordinary evening. I was in the kitchen preparing another meal that I hoped would satisfy his impossible standards. I had no idea what I'd done wrong that night, but when he walked into the room, there was something different about his presence. The air seemed heavier. The tension that had always simmered between us was now a full-blown storm, ready to burst. Mark stood at the entrance of the kitchen staring at the table I had set for him. His eyes flicked over the meal, and for a split second, I saw a flash of something deeper than his usual indifference. "This is pathetic," he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. "You can't even get dinner right anymore. You think I'm going to eat this?" His gaze was venomous as he glanced from the plate to me. It wasn't just disappointment in his eyes now. It was disdain. It was hatred. I had seen it before, but tonight it felt more real, more threatening than ever. My heart began to race, my palms sweating as I gripped the edge of the counter. I'm sorry, Mark." I stammered, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "I must have made a mistake. Let me fix it for you." I moved toward the stove, but he was already advancing, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You really think I'm going to eat this crap?" He was shouting now, his voice rising, his anger visible in every line of his face. "Do you even care about me anymore? You've been nothing but a burden since Dad died. You're weak, Eleanor. Pathetic. Just like you've always been. No wonder I can't stand being around you." I froze. The words hit me like a slap, stinging in a way that no physical blow ever had. Weak. Pathetic. A burden. I was no longer his mother. I was no longer a person. I was just a shadow of his disgust, an obstacle standing in his way. I felt tears well up in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wasn't going to cry in front of him. Not anymore. "Mark, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm doing the best I can. I don't know what you want from me, but I'm trying." "Trying," he scoffed, stepping closer, his face mere inches from mine. You've been trying for years. You've been trying to be a good mother, but look at you. You can't even manage the simplest of things. You can't even make a decent meal and you think you're entitled to be respected. You're nothing, Eleanor, nothing. And that was it, the moment I snapped. It wasn't the food, it wasn't the abuse, it wasn't even the physical pain. It was the realization that I had allowed this. I had let him degrade me, manipulate me, and control me for so long that I had forgotten who I was. I had been so consumed with pleasing him, with trying to win back the love and respect I thought he had once had for me, that I had lost myself in the process. And I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't let him break me down further. Not one more day. The words came out before I could stop them, and for the first time in years, I stood tall. You don't get to do this to me anymore, Mark. I said, my voice firm despite the trembling in my chest. I'm not your servant. I'm not your punching bag. I've given you everything and I've let you take everything from me. But not anymore. I'm done. His eyes widened for a moment, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, before it was replaced by rage. He stepped back, his fists clenching so tightly his knuckles turned white. You're done, he spat. You think you can just walk away from me, from everything I've done for you? You're nothing, Eleanor. You've never been anything. I made you who you are. You're mine. Don't forget that. The room seemed to spin, the words echoing in my mind as if they were the final nails in my coffin. But as I looked at him, really looked at him, I saw something I had never seen before: fear. He was afraid. Afraid that I was no longer the person he could manipulate, the person who would always give in, always surrender. And in that moment, I realized something important. I had never been powerless. I had simply allowed myself to be. But not anymore. I'm not yours, Mark. I said, my voice steady, unwavering. You've controlled me long enough, but I'm taking my life back, starting now. I turned away from him, not waiting for him to respond, not giving him the chance to tear me down any further. And as I walked toward the door, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just walking away from him. I was walking away from the years of guilt, of silence, of fear. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the chains I had allowed him to wrap around me. But I knew this wasn't going to be easy. I knew there would be consequences. Mark wasn't the type of person to let go of control without a fight. As I opened the door and stepped into the night air, a cold wind biting at my skin, I felt a surge of adrenaline, of defiance. I was done being afraid, done being silent. The moment I stepped outside, I made a decision. I would fight, not just for my freedom, but for my dignity, for my life. And I wasn't going to let Mark take that from me again. I didn't know what the next few days would bring, but for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, I could still change the course of my life. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone, especially not my son, take that away from me. As I walked into the cold night, my heart was pounding. My mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. But there was one thought that echoed above all the rest. I was done being a victim. I was going to take my life back piece by piece, no matter what it took. And nothing, not Mark, not his threats, not his manipulation was going to stop me. This was just the beginning. The days after that night felt like a blur, a whirlwind of emotions and actions that I wasn't sure I was ready for. But there was no turning back now. The dam had broken, and there was no way to stop the flood. I had confronted Mark, and for the first time in years, I had stood up to him. The guilt, the fear, all of it swirled within me, but one thing remained clear. I could no longer live in silence. I had lived under Mark's shadow for far too long, and the light was starting to shine through the cracks. I had made the decision to take back control of my life, no matter the cost. The morning after our confrontation, I felt a sense of dread deep in my bones. The silence in the house was suffocating thick with the weight of unspoken words. Mark had locked himself in his room, and I could feel the anger simmering behind that door. He was probably plotting his next move, figuring out how to regain control. But I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I couldn't afford to be. It was around noon when Lydia came over. She had been my closest friend for years, the one person who had stuck by me through thick and thin. When I opened the door to her, she could tell immediately that something was different. She didn't ask, though. She just walked in her eyes, scanning my face, looking for any sign of the storm that had just passed through my life. "Are you okay?" she asked, softly, her voice filled with concern. I nodded, but the lump in my throat threatened to choke me. "I'm better," I said, though. I wasn't sure if I was telling the truth. How could I be better when the one person I thought I could trust had torn my world apart? But I wasn't going to break down in front of her. Not anymore. "You don't look like it," she said, her gaze softening. "Mark?" I nodded again this time, more slowly. The fear was still there, crawling in the back of my mind. I could hear his voice in my head, his threats echoing as though they were fresh. But there was something else now, too, a quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. "I've had enough, Lydia." I finally said, my voice shaking only slightly. "I can't keep pretending like everything's fine. I can't live like this anymore." Lydia's eyes filled with empathy. "You don't have to," she said gently, stepping closer to me. "You're not alone. You don't have to face him by yourself." I let out a shaky breath. "But what if I fail? What if I'm not strong enough?" "You are," she replied with such conviction that it almost made me believe her. "You've been strong for so long, Eleanor. It's time to fight back, not just for you, but for your dignity, for your peace." Her words, though comforting, didn't ease the turmoil in my chest. I knew she was right. I knew that I had to fight, but it felt like I was about to take on something much larger than myself. The fear of what Mark might do next was like a shadow following me everywhere. But for the first time in years, I realized that I could no longer let fear dictate my life. That afternoon, I did what I had been too terrified to do for so long. I made the call. I reached out to the lawyer I had been avoiding for weeks. I told her everything. I told her about the years of emotional and physical abuse, about Mark's control over my life, about the stolen money, about the manipulation. The words came out in a rush, like a floodgate opening, and I felt the weight of all those years of silence begin to lift off my shoulders. The lawyer assured me that I had a strong case, but I knew there was more to it than that. I was up against my own flesh and blood, the person I had loved and raised. I wasn't just fighting for my own freedom, I was fighting against everything I had believed in for so long. By the time Mark came out of his room, the plan was set into motion. I could feel the tension in the air, thick with his anger. The moment he saw me standing in the kitchen, his face twisted into that familiar mask of contempt. He didn't speak at first, but I could see the fury simmering beneath the surface. His eyes narrowed as he took a step toward me. "What did you do?" His voice was low, a warning in every syllable. "What the hell did you do, Mom?" I stood tall, my hands shaking slightly, but my resolve was firm. "I'm done, Mark. I'm not going to live like this anymore. I've contacted a lawyer and I'm filing charges." His face contorted with disbelief, then quickly shifted to rage. "You're going to regret this," he spat, his voice rising. "No one will believe you. You're just a crazy old woman trying to ruin my life. You'll never get away with this. I'll destroy you." I flinched at his words, but I didn't back down. I couldn't. "You're the one who's ruined everything," I said, my voice steady now, though the weight of his words still lingered in my chest. "You've stolen from me, manipulated me, and abused me for years, and I'm not going to let you do it anymore." He lunged at me, but I saw it coming. It was a movement I had witnessed hundreds of times, his attempts to intimidate, to overpower. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I stepped back out of his reach, and without thinking, I grabbed my phone from the counter. "I've already called the police." I said, my voice calm but loud enough for him to hear. The color drained from his face, and for a split second, I saw something in his eyes, a flash of panic, of fear. It wasn't the fear of losing his control over me, it was the fear of facing the consequences for his actions. For the first time, I saw Mark not as the powerful figure he had always tried to be, but as the broken, scared man he truly was. "Don't do this," he pleaded, his voice cracking for the first time in years. "Please, Mom, you don't understand. I need this. I need everything." His words were desperate, but they no longer had the power to sway me. He had taken everything I had, everything I was, and I was done being manipulated. "No," I said the word, simple but final. "You don't get to do this anymore." Just then the doorbell rang. It was Clarice standing at the door with her usual warmth, but her face was set with determination. She had been there for me through everything, and now she was here to make sure I didn't face this alone. Behind her was the lawyer, her presence calm and professional. I stepped toward the door and Mark's eyes followed me. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He was lost now, his power slipping away faster than he could comprehend. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a sense of liberation. I had done it. I had stood up to him, and I had finally taken the first step toward freeing myself from his grip. But the road ahead was not going to be easy. The legal battle would be long, and Mark would fight dirty. He had nothing left to lose, and I knew he would do whatever it took to destroy me to regain the control he so desperately craved. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I had a plan. I had the law on my side, and I had people who believed me. I wasn't alone anymore. The police arrived soon after taking Mark in for questioning. His face twisted with rage as they handcuffed him, but I didn't flinch. I watched as they led him out of the house, his world crumbling around him. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't over yet, but it was the beginning of the end. And I was ready to fight for my freedom, for my dignity, and for the life that had been taken from me. The aftermath of Mark's arrest felt surreal, as though I were walking through a dream. The house, once filled with tension, was eerily silent in the days that followed. It was a quiet I hadn't known in years, a silence that held no fear, no anxiety, only the heavy weight of something new, freedom. For so long, I had been trapped in a cycle of abuse, gaslighting, and manipulation. I had believed that my life was forever tied to Mark's control, to his cruel demands, to his false accusations. I had lived under the shadow of his threats, the sting of his words, the weight of his fists. But now, as the dust settled, I felt a sense of clarity. The fog that had clouded my mind for so long was beginning to lift, and for the first time in years, I could breathe again. The first few days after Mark's arrest were a blur of legal calls, police reports, and meetings with my lawyer. The lawyer had been a godsend, helping me navigate the paperwork and the process, guiding me through every step as I took back control of my life. As the truth began to unfold, I was flooded with emotions, relief, yes, but also anger, shame, and disbelief. The years of manipulation, the countless lies Mark had told, the way he had stolen my money, my dignity, it all came rushing at me in waves. I was angry at myself for allowing it to go on for so long, angry at him for stripping away my life, my worth, but most of all, I was angry at the world for letting this happen. How many women like me had stayed silent, stayed in toxic relationships because they were too afraid to stand up? How many had suffered in silence, believing that they were alone, that their abusers were untouchable? But no more. I wasn't going to be silent anymore. The days after Mark's arrest were filled with paperwork, but also moments of quiet reflection. I spent time in the garden, the one place in the house where I had always felt peace. The flowers were blooming. The sun was warm, and I found myself finally able to appreciate the beauty around me. I hadn't done that in so long, just stopped and looked at the world around me. For so many years, I had been focused on pleasing Mark, trying to keep him happy, doing everything in my power to avoid his wrath. But in the end, nothing I did was ever enough. I began to realize that I wasn't just healing from the abuse. I was reclaiming the pieces of myself I had lost. I was rediscovering who I was before Mark's shadow had consumed me, before his cruelty had broken me down. There was a woman inside me, a strong, independent woman who had worked hard, who had raised her son with love and devotion, who had a life of her own before Mark had taken it. She was still there, hidden beneath the years of pain, but she was emerging slowly, cautiously, like a flower blooming after a long winter. And then there was Lydia. My dear, sweet Lydia. She had been my lifeline through all of this. She was the one person who never judged me, who never made me feel small or weak. She was the one who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. She was the one who encouraged me to seek help, to call the lawyer, to file the police report, to take back my life. And when Mark had been arrested, Lydia had been right by my side, offering support, encouragement, and a shoulder to lean on. "Eleanor, you've done it," she said to me one afternoon as we sat in the garden sipping tea. "You've taken your life back." It was strange to hear those words spoken aloud. I hadn't allowed myself to think of it that way. I hadn't thought about how far I had come, how much I had accomplished in such a short amount of time. For so long, I had been too afraid to see my own strength, too afraid to acknowledge my own power. But Lydia was right. I had done it. I had survived, and I was stronger than I had ever been before. It wasn't easy, of course. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be legal battles, and there was still the lingering fear that Mark's influence would creep back into my life. But that fear didn't consume me anymore. I had the law on my side, and I had the support of the people who cared about me. I wasn't alone. In the days that followed, I began to think about my future. It had been so long since I had thought about what I wanted, about what made me happy. I had spent so many years focusing on Mark, on his needs, his desires, his happiness, that I had completely lost track of my own. Now, for the first time in years, I could think for myself. I could dream again. I knew I needed to make some changes in my life. The first was my living situation. The house, which had once been a sanctuary, was now a reminder of the years I had spent in fear. I didn't want to leave it, but I knew I needed to. It was time to start fresh. Lydia offered me a place to stay for as long as I needed, and for the first time, I felt the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. I didn't have to stay in the house that had been a prison anymore. I could leave. I could start over. The second change was more personal. I had spent so many years sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of others, first for my husband, then for Mark. But now I was going to focus on myself. I began to take care of my health both physically and emotionally. I started walking every day, taking time to breathe, to be present in the moment. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with over the years, and I started finding joy in the small things again, reading a book, enjoying a cup of tea, spending time in nature. One day, Lydia suggested something I had never thought about going back to work. She told me that I was still young, that I had so much to offer the world, and that I didn't have to stay in the past. At first, the thought of returning to a career seemed overwhelming. I hadn't worked in years, and the world had changed so much in that time. But then I remembered who I was before Mark had taken control of my life. I was an accomplished woman, a successful lawyer with a career that had been the pride of my life. I had earned my place in the world, and I wasn't about to let it slip away just because of a few years of abuse. With Lydia's encouragement, I began looking for work again. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I doubted myself. But every time I felt unsure, I reminded myself of how far I had come. I was no longer the frightened woman who had lived in fear of her own son. I was no longer the woman who had allowed herself to be manipulated, controlled, and abused. I was Eleanor Blackwood, and I was going to rebuild my life. And so I did. It wasn't an overnight process. It took time, patience, and a lot of hard work. But little by little, I regained my sense of self-worth. I began to live for myself, to make choices that were right for me, and to embrace the future, however uncertain it was. As for Mark, he remained in jail, awaiting trial for his crimes. His attempts to manipulate and threaten me continued, but they no longer had any power over me. I was no longer afraid of him. He was a broken man, a shell of the person he had once been, and I had no more room in my life for his toxicity. In the end, I didn't just take back my house, my money, or my freedom. I took back my life. I learned that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for, and that no matter how many years I had spent in darkness, I could still find my way to the light. The future wasn't clear, but for the first time, I felt ready to face it. I wasn't going to let my past define me anymore. I was going to define my own future, and that was a future I could be proud of. As I looked out over the garden one last time, I felt something stir inside me, a sense of peace, a quiet confidence. It was the peace that comes from knowing that no matter what happened, I would be okay. I had fought for myself, and I had won. And nothing, not even my son, could take that away from me. To anyone reading this, I want you to hear me when I say you are not alone. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where you feel trapped, whether by someone else's control manipulation or even your own fears know this, you can break free. I know it seems impossible at times. I lived in silence for years, convincing myself that things would get better, that the love I thought I had for my son was enough to make everything right. But I learned the hard way that love cannot be one-sided. You cannot sacrifice yourself and your worth for someone who doesn't value you. There comes a time when you must stand up for yourself, when you must put your needs and your happiness first, even if it means walking away from what you thought was the only life you knew. If you're in a place where you feel helpless, where you feel like the world has been taken from you, I want to remind you there's strength inside you that you haven't even begun to realize. You are capable of so much more than you think. It's not easy and it won't be quick. The road ahead is long, but every step you take toward your freedom is a victory. Speak up, seek help, reach out to the people who love you even if they're few. You deserve to live a life free from fear, free from control, and free from guilt. Your worth is not tied to someone else's approval. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, whether it's a part of your story or just something that resonates with you. If you've ever had to break free from a toxic relationship, what was the turning point for you? What helped you take that first step toward reclaiming your life? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Let's support one another. Thank you for reading my story. If it inspired even one person to stand up for themselves, then it was worth every word. Keep fighting for yourself. You deserve peace, you deserve love, and you deserve to live a life that makes you feel whole. Take care of yourselves always, and remember, the journey to freedom starts with the courage to make that first step.